Welcome to everybody today. We're really pleased to be celebrating Biodiversity Week with you. And it's a really special year for us in Green Schools as it's our 25th anniversary. So it's great to have such a lovely sunny Biodiversity Week to celebrate it with. So during today's session, please do keep your microphones on mute. But we would like to hear from you, so you can answer any questions that might come up or ask any questions of your own through the chat box. So don't be afraid to get your fingers ready. We are looking out for really engaged classes throughout our webinars, and I've already picked out some from our webinars earlier this week. So if you have any good questions, make sure you put them in and you might win a biodiversity prize. So today's webinar, we have got Kate Chandler, and Kate's from the All Ireland Pollinator Plan, and she is going to chat to us a little bit all about pollinators and how your school can help them. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand you over to Kate.
Thanks, Claire. So hi everyone, and thank you, Claire, for the introduction. Delighted to be here today. My name's Kate and I work for Biodiversity Ireland on the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. And we work to protect bees and other pollinators all over Ireland and to help people learn how to help bees in their schools, gardens, sports clubs and where they live. So some of you might already know what pollinators are, and I know for a fact that some of you have been doing work to help bees and pollinators at your schools already, and I'd love to hear about some of that work you've been doing later on. But some of you might not know what pollinators are. So today we're going to ask the question, what are pollinators? And we're also going to find out a little bit about why they're in trouble and what we can do to help them. And there'll be time, I think, plenty of time for questions at the end. I'm not going to talk very long because I'd love to hear from you guys. But if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll do my best to answer them. So pollinator is the name for a creature that moves a powder called pollen between flowers, and pollen is that yellow orangey powdery stuff that you might get on your clothes if you brush past some flowers, and it's also what causes hay fever. So if some of you have been sneezing over the past few weeks because of hay fever, that's because of pollen. And when pollinators move pollen between flowers, we call it pollination. And pollination is a really important job because plants need pollen from other plants of the same type in order to make new seeds, and those seeds then grow into new plants. So they can't walk around and share pollen between themselves, so they need creatures and animals and insects to help them do that. And pollination is really important for us as humans because a lot of plants like fruit and vegetables like strawberries and apples and beans all need pollinators to make new seeds. So without pollinators, a lot of our food just would not exist. So who are pollinators? So we've said already that some pollinators are bees, but you might not know that some pollinators are also moths and hoverflies. So those are those small little fly-like creatures you might see hovering around. And in some countries, pollinators are also birds and even bats. There are some bats that like visiting flowers and they would be pollinators as well, but not in Ireland. In Ireland, most of our pollinators are bees. And bees fly to flowers to get a liquid called nectar. And this is full of sugar that gives them the energy to fly. That's right in the middle of the flower. But bees have very long tongues that let them reach in and drink it. And if you're ever watching a bee on a flower, take a close look and you might be able to see them sticking their tongue out to get the nectar. And it really is amazing because their tongues aren't like ours. They're black. They're almost like straws. So they stick them out and right into the middle of the flower to get the nectar. While they're drinking that nectar, that pollen powder gets stuck to their bodies. And they take some of that pollen back to their nests to feed young bees. And you can see here that the bee has made a little ball of pollen that it's carrying on its legs, and it does that with a mixture of pollen and its own spit. It uses that to make a sticky ball that it then carries on its legs to take back to the nest. They then fly to the next flower, to find more nectar, and some of that pollen comes loose and goes on to the next flower, and this causes pollination. So before we go any further, I just want you all to take a minute and think about bees and think about what a bee is. So take 30 seconds or so and think about what words come to mind. What do you picture in your mind when you think about a bee? When was the last time you saw a bee? What did it look like? And if you like, put some words into the chat. If not, just think of a few words and make a picture in your mind. So we'll give you 30 seconds or so to do that. Okay. So hopefully you've had a think, some words have come to mind, some images have come to mind in your head of what a bee is. And I can see there's a couple of comments in the chat. So what have we got here? Honey, nectar, black and yellow, hive, sting, yellow and black bug that collects and spreads pollen, a flying bug that goes to a hive, an insect that collects pollen. Brilliant. All of those are correct. That's fantastic. And there's no right or wrong answers here either. This is just to get you thinking about what you imagine a bee to be. So we've got this, you might have had a picture like this pop into your head, black and yellow bug, we've heard that. Honey, maybe, buzz, bees buzz. Hive, we've heard. Sting as well. So if anyone's been stung by a bee, you'll know that that can be quite sore. So what I suppose, what a lot of people don't know is that most bees don't actually make honey. Most bees don't live in hives, and most bees don't sting. And the ones that do sting are only the girls. The boys don't sting, so only girl bees sting. So just like there are loads of different types of birds, like seagulls and pigeons and blackbirds, there are lots of different types of bee. And in fact, there are over 100 different types of bee in Ireland. And just like people and birds, they come in all shapes and sizes. So in Ireland, we've got one honeybee, just one. And this is the bee that would be making your honey. So if you enjoy honey on toast, that you've got the honeybee to thank for that. This is also the only bee that lives in hives, and they're usually looked after by humans, beekeepers with those big suits that you might have seen. Then we've also got bumblebees. So these are the big fluffy bees that you might see. They're really easy to spot because they're quite large. They're flying around quite a bit at the moment. We've got 21 different types of bumblebee. And then we've also got what we call solitary bees. And these are smaller, and some of them don't look like what you'd imagine a bee would look like at all. They look a bit more like flies, and they can be quite hard to spot. And most bees in Ireland are actually solitary bees. And we call solitary bees and bumblebees wild bees because they're not looked after by humans like honeybees. So just to give you a picture, these are all the different kinds of bumblebees in Ireland. So this is one of the posters that you can find free on our website. As you can see, they all look kind of similar. So I wouldn't worry about all the different kinds now. This is just to show you that there's loads of different types of them. Most of them are the same in that they're big and they're fluffy. You can see them buzzing around quite easily. They live in groups called colonies. And like birds, they make nests. And just like birds, they lay eggs. But their nests and eggs are much smaller and harder to spot. So this is a bumblebee nest. So it's just long grass, and you can see the bumblebee there in the middle flying out of its nest. So they'd lay their eggs in long grass close to the ground and then go to and fro, getting their nectar from flowers. And then solitary bees, there are loads of these. 70-something solitary bees at the moment in Ireland. And again, don't worry about all these different kinds. That's just to show you how many of them that there are. And you might know that solitary, the word solitary also means alone. So solitary bees are called solitary bees because, unlike bumblebees, they make nests on their own. They don't make nests in groups with other types of with other bees. And they also make nests. So solitary bees make nests. Some solitary bees make nests in holes, like holes in wood or holes in a wall, and we call these cavity nesting bees. And this is a this is a cavity nesting bee here. You can see it peeking out of its hole in one of the bee hotels that you might have at school or at home. You can see another one that's a little bit more shy poking out there. And then you can see this up here. This is another solitary bee hole, and it's packed up, it's full, it's been plugged up. And what happens is when the solitary bee, when the cavity nesting bee has laid its eggs, and it's finished, it's done what it needs to do, it gathers mud and sometimes leaves and stuff in its legs, flies back to the nest and packs it in. So it plugs up the hole. And this protects the baby bees over the winter, and then they dig their way out in the spring and the cycle starts again. So that's cavity nesting bees. And then you also have what we call mining bees. And I don't know whether you can see these little holes here in the bank. Every one of these holes is a nest for a mining bee. So in the same way, they dig a hole into the mud, lay their eggs, and then pack up the mud to protect the baby bees over the winter. And then those baby bees would then come out in the spring. So wild bees, bumblebees and solitary bees, are in trouble and they need our help. Just like us, they need food for energy and to keep them healthy, that nectar that we talked about earlier, and they also need shelter, so somewhere to lay their eggs, make their nests, to keep the cycle going. But the problem is there aren't enough of the right flowers in our landscape to feed them or places for them to nest. The good news is it's really easy to help them. All we need to do is make sure they have plenty of food and shelter, so flowers to feed on and places to nest. So just like us, bees have favourite food, and their favourite food in Ireland anyway is actually dandelions. So you've probably seen these bright yellow flowers popping up through cracks in the pavement, growing up through some grass. You might have seen the dandelion clocks or blown those. These are the seeds that grow into new dandelions. So these are actually in Ireland a bee's favourite food, and sometimes people like to dig them up, but it's really important that we protect these where we can. Even just leaving a few can help your local bees. Bees also like feeding on the flowers of trees, because a lot of trees also have flowers, although sometimes they're quite hard to spot, like holly and blackthorn. And these often have flowers at certain times of the year when other food isn't as available. So they're really important for bees when they might run the risk of going a little bit hungry. And then in our gardens or in pots or window boxes, we can grow other plants like sunflowers and lavender, or some herbs, which are really popular with bees as well. And then shelter, as we've already seen, bees like nesting in long grass, so leaving some areas to grow a little bit wild is always a good idea. And then thinking of those cavity nesting bees, you could also have these bee hotels to make nest areas for them. Make sure they're small though, so they don't attract birds like predators. So you can get very big ones. So if you can, make sure that they're no bigger than an average sized bird box. So what can you do to help pollinators at your school? There's loads of ways that you can help. On our website, we've got a guide for making a pollinator plan for your school. And the first step in there is coming up with a pollinator team. So a team of students and staff who want to help pollinators at the school. You can draw a map of your school. So this is a map made by students in St Mary and St Gerard's in Enniskerry. And this is a map of all the places around the school that are already good for pollinators. So places where there's grass that's grown a little bit long, or wildflowers, or hedgerows that are in blossom. And that just helps you get a picture of where's already good, and those are the areas that you need to protect. Then after that, the best thing you can do is mow the grass a little bit less. So this lets wildflowers grow like dandelions. And you could even, we invite all schools to take part in pitches for pollinators, which is when you leave your playing pitches unmown over the summer when you're not using them over the summer holidays. And this lets a few wildflowers grow up and helps feed the bees that might be living near your school. And then you could also plant flowers and trees, and your school might have a garden area or a sensory garden, or some area like that where you could put some pollinator friendly flowers and herbs, and there are lists of what kinds of flowers you might want to use on our website. And then you could also, if you want, add your school to the online map, Actions for Pollinators. And these orange dots are all schools all around the country that are helping bees on the school grounds. So you can add your school on there and help us keep track of where in the country is being managed for pollinators. And then how can you help pollinators at home? Some of you might have a lawn at home. If you do, you might talk to a grown-up about mowing the lawn a little bit less, even just in some areas, to let the grass grow a bit. Or if you don't have a garden, you can make a pot for pollinators. So you can do this in a pot or a window box, doesn't need to be very big, and just get a pot, get a bit of compost or soil and pollinator friendly plants or seeds or bulbs. And even just one pot can make a difference. And it's like provides some food for the bees that might be living nearby, like sunflowers and snowdrops are really good as well. And we've got a guide of how to do this on our website. And we've also got lists on our website of which plants are particularly good. We know that these that bees like these plants in particular, and they're full of that nectar that they love visiting flowers for. So I'm going to wrap up soon, but I'm going to leave you all with a challenge, and that is to start looking around you and notice what's there. And this is a good thing to do for nature generally, not just pollinators. But once you start looking for bees, you will start noticing them more, and you'll realize how many of them are actually around you. So what are they doing? Are they flying? Are they sitting still? Are they on a flower? Which flowers are they visiting? So that's often a good way of telling which flowers they like best. Which ones are they landing on to drink from? See if you can spot their tongues sticking out. Where in your school is already good for bees? So where is the grass growing a little bit longer? Where have you got your hedgerows? Where have you got your wildflowers? And once you start looking, you might be surprised by what you see. So if you want to find out more, there's loads of information on our website, like that how-to guide that I mentioned. We've got the Junior Pollinator Plan too, and we've got that in Irish as well. So our website is pollinators.ie. Everything on there is free, and hopefully that will give you some ideas of what you can do to help bees. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and happy to take any questions or hear about anything you've been doing at your school for pollinators.
That was great, Kate. Thanks so much. Loads of interesting facts there. So yeah, guys, if people have questions about bees or other pollinators, now we can help them. Do put them in the chat box now, and we can have a chat about them. I actually had a question about what you're kind of talking about, how bees have different types of favorite flowers, or certain flowers are better for bees. What is it about flowers that bees like or don't like?
Well, bees generally prefer the flowers that grow. The bees in Ireland prefer native Irish wildflowers because they've evolved alongside them. And so they would have a lot of nectar in them. They'd have a lot of pollen. Some flowers don't have so much nectar and pollen, like daffodils, for example, wouldn't have loads of nectar and pollen. So it really depends. Like there's also a lot of flowers that don't come from Ireland that are great for bees as well. And again, a lot of those herbs come under that, like rosemary and sunflowers, but they can also be fantastic too. So as long as it's got loads of nectar and pollen, that's what they like, really.
Brilliant. So we have loads of questions coming in here. So Dilgary National School asks, why do males bees not sting?
That's a really good question, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, and I'll say that I don't know. I don't really know. I know that those solitary bees, so that big group of bees that we talked about, with loads of them on the poster, none of those really sting at all, or the ones that do sting, their sting is so small that it wouldn't even get through your skin. So it really depends on the bee, but maybe that's a good project to find out why male bees don't sting.
Definitely, yeah.
We'll have to ask them.
Yes, they're just more gentle. And then from Mr. O'Gorman's class, they ask, are bees prey for any animal?
Yeah.
Bees.
Yeah. So they would be prey for birds in particular. So like I mentioned earlier with the bee hotel, that's why it's important to keep those quite small. Because if you get a big one, the birds are going to look at that and think, wow, there's loads of food here. So keeping it quite small is a good way to protect them from birds. And also with bumblebees, so we saw that bumblebees nest in long grass. You can get badgers eating bumblebee nests. So we hear about that a fair bit. So badgers and birds are the ones that come to mind immediately, but they would be quite popular prey, yes.
And then we have another question from Gary. So this asks, what is a bee's very favorite flower or plant? Similar to what I was asking there.
Has to be dandelions. And we know that because every year we ask people to send us in pictures and sightings of bees and what they're feeding on, so what flower they're on. And last year and the year before that, we got most pictures of bees on dandelions. So we know for a fact that dandelions are bees' #1 favorite food.
Very cool. So definitely we don't want to cut down our dandelions if they're growing in the grass. Roughly how many bees are there in Ireland from Miss Houlihan's class?
I'm not sure whether that question is how many bees there are in total or how many different types of bee. I can't tell you how many bees there are in total. There would be loads, although their numbers are actually going down, which is why we need to try and help them. But there are over 100 different types of bees. So I think the number at the moment is about 102. So that one honeybee, about 21 bumblebees, and then 70 something solitary bees, all different types. But the reason I say at the moment is because new ones keep arriving, new types of bee keep arriving. So the latest bee to arrive is called the hairy-footed flower bee. And I wish I could show you a picture, because when you look at a picture of it, it does actually have hairy feet. It has long hairs on its feet. And that was spotted in Harold's Cross in Dublin last year. And they tend to arrive on the east coast of Ireland because they come over from Britain. And that's how most of the bees arrive. So we are getting new ones fairly regularly, sort of every year or so. There might be a new one popping up. And if there's a new one appearing in Britain, then we know it probably isn't going to be long before we find it in Ireland. But at the moment, it's about 102.
Got it there.
Hairy-footed flower. Oh, look at that. Look at that those hairy feet. Yeah. So you can see why it got its name.
That is very cool looking.
They're very easy to spot.
Yeah. And will we keep getting, like as a kind of climate change is happening, we're getting warmer, will that kind of mean bees that like warmer temperatures start arriving here? Or is it more just kind of by chance that things will kind of arrive over here?
Yeah, it's a bit of both, I think. So we're seeing with lots of different types of creature that as the climate gets warmer, the areas they live are changing. So that can mean that we get more creatures that more types of creature that we haven't seen before. But it can also mean that life gets harder for those types of bee that maybe prefer it to be a bit cooler. So what you tend to find is you get a sort of push up into the northwest. So there's a rare type of bee in Ireland called the great yellow bumblebee, which only really lives in the northwest coast now, because it's sort of been pushed up. That's the only place it's sort of clinging on. So it can go either way.
Cool. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens there. So let me see. So Sullivan class asks, how long do bees live for? It's 5th class in Donnybrook.
Yeah, it depends on the bee. So it tends to be, I think, no more than a year. But with the solitary bees, what they would do is they'd hatch in the spring. So you've got your bees that are maybe a couple of months old at this stage, flying about, solitary bees. They'd mate and make their nests, lay their eggs, build, plug up their nests like we saw earlier, so pack them in. And then after that, they'd go off and die. And the baby bees that were in the nest then would emerge next year. So they wouldn't even live for a year. Bumblebees, I think, maybe a little bit longer. One of the reasons they're fluffy is because they're designed to that live in the cold, so they can survive in the slightly colder months. And usually they would sort of hibernate and emerge in February, start to hibernate maybe October latest. So they would live for a little bit longer.
Very cool. So we have a couple of questions here about whether bees die when they sting, and do they know, one class asks, why do they do it if they know they will die? So are they aware that there's risk involved? Or there's lots of rumors about bee stings. So
yeah, it's a good question whether they know they will die. I don't know. It's hard to know, isn't it, what a bee thinks? But I suppose what I can say is that the reason they do it, and just for people who don't know, I think honeybees in particular, they die when they sting. And the reason for that is that their whole entire job is to protect the nest and the hive, and that's their purpose, and that's what they live for. So they will, they're happy to sting, and if it means that if they die, as long as it protects the nest. So it's just their way of doing everything they can to protect the hive as a whole.
And are some bumblebees able to sting without dying? Is it going to depend on
I think so.
sting?
Yeah, I think so. Now I'm not 100% sure, but I think they can. But I think it's the honeybees that die when they sting. I think bumblebees are all right, but maybe they can only do it once, because they often leave their sting behind, and they don't grow a new one. So they've got one chance to use that sting.
I know I was stung by a bumblebee when I was in school, and it flew off quite happily. So it must depend. So we still have loads of questions coming in here. So one is about wasps, and it's asking, do wasps also pollinate?
Yeah, some of them do. In fact, bees, I believe, evolved from wasps, because this was a long time ago, millions of years ago. But they figured out that it was actually because wasps eat other insects and other creatures, so they're predatory, they're carnivorous. But I believe they might eat some pollen as well, possibly. But at some point they realized that it was actually less dangerous to start living off the pollen and the nectar than it was to be going after other insects, and that's how bees first evolved. So bees actually come from wasps.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. It's easy to get all of those wasps and bees and hoverflies. They all can look so similar, certainly in their color. So it's interesting to know they're all connected. So Miss Carol's fourth class in St. Mary's asked, what bee is your favorite and why? That's a good question.
That's a tough question. I do love the hairy-footed flower bee because of its hairy hobbit feet, all the long hairs on it. But then you've also got a lot of the solitary bees that have really cool names. Like there's the chocolate mining bee. Don't ask me why it's called that. I don't think it's because it tastes of chocolate. I don't think anyone's tried. Let's hope not anyway. Maybe it's just because it's brown. And you've also got the dark-winged blood bee. Like they have some really cool names. And there's also a type of bee, now I can't remember the name of it now, that makes its nest in empty snail shells on sand dunes in particular. So they find empty snail shells, and they crawl in, and that's where they make their make their nests and lay their eggs. There's a lot of choice. But take a look at those poses and you'll see all the cool different names they have. It's amazing.
Yeah, let me show. I've got a picture here of the chocolate mining bee. I'll show you guys. It does look like chocolate there. It's the bottom, doesn't it?
I think
That looks
whoever
quite
named
nice.
it must just have liked chocolate. Maybe they were craving
Yeah.
chocolate that day.
Yeah. One of my favorites, didn't ask guys, but is the leaf cutter bee that cuts out a bit of leaf to cover up the entrance to its home. That's pretty cool one, I think.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. I hadn't thought of that actually, because that's when we were talking earlier about what happens when the bee plugs up its nest. Some bees, instead of getting little balls of earth, they'll go to a leaf, and often they're quite soft leaves. So there's some types of plants that have quite soft leaves like lamb's ear would be one of them. And they cut a hole in it, or some of them card the hairs off it, sort of pull the hairs off the leaf and use that to line the nest. So it's amazing what they can do. And if you see them doing that, that's even more amazing.
Yeah, and what do you know how do they actually, what part of their body are they using to do that cutting or tearing? Is it their legs, or do they have, because they have a tongue, they don't have teeth?
Yeah. So when that's a good question actually. I know for the what type of bees that we call carder bees, so they're the ones that would be taking the hairs off. They're just using their legs to do that, I think. But I'm not sure about I think possibly using their mouths to cut the holes, and you can see the little holes in the leaves sometimes where they've cut a hole, and they take that back to their nest.
Bro. Okay, so we still have loads coming in now. We'll try and get through as many as we can, guys. So Mrs. Sullivan's class asks, how much pollen can bees carry? It's a hard one.
That's a really good question. And again, it depends on the bee. So earlier we saw that picture of the bee with, I might just get it up actually to show you again, that picture of the bee with the ball of pollen on its leg. Give me a second, I'll find it again. There we go. So this bee here, you can see it's got a little ball of pollen on its leg, and that's, like I said, it's a mixture of pollen and its own spit. It makes a really sticky ball that it can stick on its legs, and you can see them sometimes flying around with these, we call them pollen packets on their legs. Now, the only bees that do that are honeybees and bumblebees. Solitary bees don't do that. So solitary bees are a bit different because they would carry the pollen quite loosely on the hairs of their body. And that means that they can't carry it back to the nest as easily, and it scatters everywhere more easily, which actually means they're very good pollinators because the pollen's spreading everywhere. But it really depends on the bee. So a honeybee would be able to carry far more pollen than a solitary bee, for example, because it has adapted to carry this big ball of pollen on its leg. But the other interesting thing about that is that you can tell when you look at the pollen packet what flowers the bee has been visiting, because they change color. So this one here is quite orange, so you know that it's been visiting plants that are maybe a bit more yellow or orange. But if you see a bee that has been drinking the nectar and getting pollen from lavender, for example, the pollen packet might be more purpley. And if it's been on blackberry flowers as well later in the year, again, it will be kind of a grey purple colour. So you can kind of figure out where the bee has been based on the colour of the pollen packet.
Oh, cool. You can almost spy on them, work out where they've been. Very cool. So Dulgari National School asks, are bees invertebrates, and where do they mostly hang out?
Yeah, bees are invertebrates, and they hang out wherever there's food. So wherever there are flowers that have the nectar and pollen that they need. And the other thing with that is that they'll only build their nests close to where there's food. So bumblebees tend to only build a nest within about 1 kilometre of where there's food, or forage within 1 kilometre of their nest. and solitary bees only look for food within a few hundred meters of their nest. So they don't tend to roam that far from wherever it is they have their nest, which is why, again, it's really important that we make sure there's plenty of food for them in the landscape, because they don't tend to travel that far.
Yeah. So Tom from fifth class asks, do bees sting other insects and animals? It's a good question, Tom.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, they would. They would if they thought that they were in danger from that other animal. So if there was an animal that was maybe near their nest, or that had stepped on their nest, like if it was a bumblebee nest in long grass, or if they were near a honeybee hive, then yeah, they would come out and sting, because they would see that other animal as a danger to their nest or to their hive.
Yeah, you hear of people's pets getting stung sometimes, don't you? Like people's dogs or things might come across a nest. Yeah.
Yeah, or like my dog, who likes to try and eat bees.
Oh no.
Which is not a good idea. We've told him about it. He thinks they're a spicy snack.
Oh dear. And then we have fourth class in St. Mary's asks, can bees swim?
No, they're not great swimmers. So like any creature, bees need water to drink, but they wouldn't be able to swim very well, no. So they tend to maybe, I don't know, they try to avoid water where they could.
Cool. Yeah, it's funny. At one of our other webinars this week, I learned for the first time that red squirrels are good swimmers. I never knew before, but I would have been really surprised if you had said that bees can swim very well. They don't look like they could, all right?
It's surprising that animals that can swim well, and you think like hedgehogs, I think, can swim quite well, but you wouldn't look at them and think, wouldn't think that they were strong swimmers.
No, definitely not. And then another question from the same class is, how fast can a bee fly?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah. I think round about, again, it depends on the bee, because some of them, like the bumblebees, would be a bit bigger and heavier. And the smaller bees, like the solitary bees and the honeybees, would be a bit lighter. But I think about 15 miles an hour, 15, 20 miles an hour. Next time you see one, watch how fast it goes and see if you can figure it out.
Yeah, to get them in front of one of those speed cameras, see how quick they go. Dilgari National School asks, do spiders eat bees?
I think they would if they could. Yeah, spiders tend to go for anything that ends up in their web. So if a bee ends up in their web, then it's, that's lunch for them. It would be, depending on the type of bee, it would be a bit of a job for them, because some of them can be quite big. And a lot of them also wouldn't, like big bumblebees, they might not very easily get stuck in a spider web. They might be able to pull themselves out a bit easier, but yeah, I think they would.
Yeah, I know I've seen some in there. If any you guys are out after lunch and you have a lot of ivy growing over a wall or something, often you find a lot of spiders' webs there. I've definitely seen a few bees and other insects caught in those. Yeah, whether or not the spider gets them, I'm not sure, but ivy's always a good place to look.
This is good. I mean, it's important for the spider to get food as well, so it's just part of nature, isn't it?
For sure. And then back to stings, we have Mr. O'Gorman's class asking about wasps. So can wasps sting more than once?
Yeah, wasps. Now, as far as I know, wasps don't sting so much as they bite. So when you get stung by a wasp, it's actually a bite. So they can do that as many times as they like, and they do, as anyone will know who's been stung by a wasp, or several of them. So it's a little bit less risky for them to bite. So yeah, they can do it as many times as they like, as far as I'm aware.
Interesting. Here's a really good question from Miss Coyne's class. What do bees use to make a hive or a nest? I guess it's
a hive would be the honeybees. So that they make out of a substance called honeycomb. Now, I can't remember exactly what that's made of, but I think again it's a mixture of their own spit and a special substance that they secrete, and that they can make into incredible patterns. And anyone who's seen a honeybee hive knows that it's amazing. You wouldn't think that it was made by an insect, because it's like a work of art, how beautiful it is. So it's made, we call that honeycomb. It's quite hard, and that's also where you would get the honey. But then other bees would, like we saw earlier, would build their nests in, burrow into the ground, or they'd make their nests in long grass. And some of them might line their nests with leaves and fur from soft leaves.
Brilliant, interesting. Yeah, it's amazing sometimes to see how animals build their home, even birds' nests and things. You think doing all this without hands and opposable thumbs and everything. It's pretty brilliant. Ashford National School asks, do bees have teeth?
Yeah, they do. They don't have teeth like we would, like a row of teeth, but they have smaller teeth that we call mandibles. So they've used them in the same way that we use teeth. So like to cut holes in leaves if they needed it, or if they needed to chew or bite anything. So yeah, they do.
Cool. Hard to picture bees with teeth. Are bees scared or wary of humans?
To be honest, bees don't really care about humans. Most bees would not be too bothered. They'd be going about their lives, doing what they're doing, getting their nectar, their pollen, and they wouldn't really be thinking about us at all. If we got close to them, because we're so large to them, if you could imagine how large a human is to a bee that size, you can see that they might be a bit wary and a bit scared, especially if we were going near their nest. But generally they don't think about us. All they worry about is getting their nectar, getting their pollen, laying their eggs, looking after their young.
Cool. Yeah, so we have I'm going to put these two questions together as a kind of link. So we have, why does the queen bee become the queen bee? And then also, why is there no such thing as a king bee?
Oh gosh, those are really good questions. I don't think we really know why a particular queen bee becomes the queen. There are so a queen bee you would get in honeybee hives or bumblebee colonies where there's a group of bees all working together, and they would be the bee that lays the eggs and is looked after by the other bees. So the other bees, worker bees, would go and collect the pollen and the nectar, and they would bring it back to the nest, and that would feed the queen bee, and it would also feed the eggs and the larvae, which is the name for the small bees that would hatch. So they would feed them. So we don't know why. I don't think we know why particular bees become queen bees, but it's that's their job. That's their only job, really, to lay eggs, and then they're looked after by the rest of the colony. But solitary bees don't do that. And why is there no such thing as a king bee? That's a really good question. Queen bees are the females, and only the females can lay eggs. So the male bees would be they would be doing is going out and getting the pollen and the nectar and looking after the nest. So I suppose they don't need a king bee, really, because the queen bee's doing everything that they need, which is to lay the eggs.
There we are. Sorry to all the boy bees out there, but yeah, you can't be the queen. Do bees have ears? It's not a good one.
Bees don't hear in the same way that we do. So the way they sense the world around them is through their antenna. So on their heads, they'll have two long straw-like things called antennae, and through their feet. So those are really sensitive, and they'll be able to tell all kinds of things from using those. That's their way of sort of hearing and seeing, if you like. So They can even tell things like if they visit a flower, they can tell if another bee has been on that flower recently. And so they'll know not to bother with it because the nectar's probably already gone. So if you see a bee sort of bumping around visiting a flower and then it's like, nope, it's almost like it changes its mind really quickly. That's why, because it can tell that another bee has already been there and taken the nectar. So they would use, as I say, their antenna and their feet more than their ears.
Very cool. Okay, so we have asked Kate a lot of questions, so we'll just do one or two more before we finish. What would be the biggest bee in Ireland in terms of size?
Oh, the great yellow bumblebee is pretty big. That's one of the biggest I can think of. Even because that's a type of bumblebee, and even when you think of bumblebees, the queen bumblebees are the biggest of those. So especially earlier in the year when they're coming out of hibernation, you'll see them and I'm making that shape, they're not that big, but they're big, and you'll notice them. But I think it would definitely be a bumblebee, probably the great yellow bumblebee, which, as I say, is quite rare.
Okay, I'll show you guys a picture here. It does look quite large.
That's not to scale.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, the flowers there, so you can get a sense of the size of it. You'd notice that if you spotted it.
Yeah, and there's quite a big difference, I guess, isn't there, between the size of the queen bee to the worker bees?
Yeah, and even between bees themselves. So I think, thinking about all the bees all over the world, the largest bee, I think, has a wingspan of a few centimeters. So that would be like that, about that big. I don't know.
Wow.
That would be big. But then the smallest bee, I think, is smaller than your fingernail. So there's a tiny type of bee that's only a few millimeters long. So it really varies depending on the bee. And they're all, a lot of them are adapted to do different things and to feed on different plants as well. You'd get some bees that would be adapted to get nectar from certain types of flower. And so again, like they have differences in like the length of their tongue. So if you think of all the different shapes of flowers, so you can get some flowers that are quite flat. If you think of a sunflower, that's quite flat and it's got like almost like a landing pad center to it where they can get the nectar. So it doesn't matter if you have a long tongue or a short tongue as a bee, you can get the nectar in that. But then you think of other flowers, like, I don't know whether you guys know what a foxglove is, or something with quite a long, or like a bluebell or something like that with a long flower head. They would need quite a long tongue to get into there. So you'd get some that would only be able to get nectar from those flowers because they had a longer tongue. And then some of them have worked out a way around that, and they've developed a behavior that we call nectar robbing, which is where instead of going into the middle of the flower, they'd go around the back of the flower, bite a hole through the petal and get the nectar that way. So they've worked out ways around it. So there's huge variety of what they can do and the shapes and sizes.
Brilliant. So that's really cool to hear. So probably just kind of the same answer to this question of how much do they weigh. I guess it also really depends.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. It does depend. Yeah. So some bees it wouldn't be very much at all. They're very light. If you've ever held a bee in your hand, and obviously you need to be careful when you do that, so don't try this. But if you've ever held a bee in your hand, you barely feel them at all. They're very, very light. I don't know exactly how much they'd weigh on average.
Yeah. Yeah, they seem to be light already. I wonder, is that something that anyone's collected information on? But okay, we'll finish off with one last question from Confor National School, and they ask, why are nearly all bees black and yellow? Great question.
Oh gosh, that's a brilliant question. Yeah, we don't. If you think about what a bee looks like, and black and yellow, often striped, and you see it with other creatures as well, like wasps are the same, and hoverflies as well. What what you usually find with these things is that they've adapted that way because it stops predators getting them. So it puts predators off. So black and yellow might indicate that they might be poisonous, or that they sort of give an illusion of danger. So it just puts birds off getting them, we think.
Yeah, we were talking about this as well during our webinar about ponds. Some of you might have been at. We were saying that some frogs use really bright colours to kind of tell people that they're dangerous. But in Ireland, it's kind of the opposite. They try and camouflage. So it's always interesting to see what the different kind of strategies different animals have, where some go for that, brightly coloured. Obviously, it's easier for predators to see them, but maybe they decide they won't risk it if they do. Okay, brilliant, guys. So these have been some amazing questions. It's great to see the amount of interest you guys have, and just really, really smart questions as well. So I've put in a lot of links into the chat box that Kate was mentioning during her presentation to the pollinator plan, and some of the different posters on bees. So do check those out if you want to learn more. We also have a few activities to do with bees lined up today as part of our species of the day, which is bees, on our Biodiversity Week page, which I will link to here. Say that to everybody. And this meeting, the recording will be online afterwards if you want to share with any other classes in your school. So I just want to say again a big thanks to Kate. That was really great. I definitely learned so much about bees, so I'm sure you all did as well. And thanks to everybody for all your questions and for taking part. Hope you get a chance to get outside today, see if you can see any bees for yourself. Can you work out what they are and what they're up to? And I hope you all enjoy the rest of Biodiversity Week. So thanks everybody. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for having me.